After the last video I put out, a lot of people assume that I hate Black Greek organizations. And that's not really true. I hate all Black organizations, at least most of them. And the reason why I'm not a really big fan is because I think generally we're not about the main thing. And I believe that the main thing should be challenging white dominance. So for Black people, since we've come to this country, we have worked for, under, and at the permission of white people. Even the institutions that we've had have been basically under their control. To a large extent, the Black church was that. Now, there were movements of liberation. I want to be clear about that. But for the most part, everything we did was under the control of white people from the very beginning. And the civil rights movement did not fix that. The movement largely replicated the gains of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 basically said, okay, y'all can go sit down and, that got like, again, I don't mean to diminish that. And there were some important things gained, but we largely had a movement that took 100 years to get the exact same thing as the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And so now you can go stop. So, and again, I'm not saying those things are unimportant. If you're traveling interstate and you need to stop somewhere, yes, because of the color of your skin, you should not be barred from stopping. I'm not saying that's insignificant, but it didn't address the core thing, that we live under white domination, that Black people have never been able to own or control anything in this country, and the Civil Rights Acts do not shift that. And so Dr. King himself is open about that. He's transparent. He gives an interview with Playboy magazine in 1965, and he says, yeah, actually the quote is, what little progress, and this is a quote, what little progress has been made, and that includes the Civil Rights Act, has applied primarily to the middle-class Negro. Among the masses, especially in the northern ghettos, the situation remains about the same, and for some it is worse. Now, what is that progress that Dr. King is alluding to for the Black middle class? Primarily that is access, whether it be access to a toilet, a water fountain, or in some cases jobs. But let's be clear, those jobs that the Black middle class had access to are jobs that are controlled by white people. Like that was primarily the access that was won. And so I don't really want to hear about this organization has X amount of Black professionals. Yes, professionals that work at the pleasure of white people, purely. I don't want to hear about Colin Powell being the first Black person, in charge of the military, because he couldn't use that military to go liberate anybody Black. And in fact, you can search the world and there were societies where slaves led armies too. That's not a new achievement. That doesn't speak to having ownership or control of anything. So you have a few middle-class Black people with a better job that white people control. I mean, okay, I guess. And so if the goal is to not live in a world where every aspect of Black life is under the explicit control of white people, then all the organizations, I don't care if it's the NAACP, the Urban League, or your church, are every bit as useless as that fraternity or sorority. Like, it's pretty much the same. So we really need to first of all agree on what are the goals. Because based on that, all these organizations could be doing a fantastic job. Like, I mean, objectively, it could be an amazing organization. It just depends on what the goals are. And so if we're trying to sustain a few middle-class Black folks, then okay. But you have to understand that that's not groundbreaking. That's not history making. When the Civil War started, there were 4 million Black folks enslaved in this country. But there were also 488,000 free Black people. Meaning, in this country, there has always been at least a few Black people doing a little better. That's not an achievement to point to this middle-class Black person doing okay. It's not an achievement to say we have an organization that has some Black professionals. That's not addressing the core thing. Or if the goal is to simply do nice things for the community, great. That's not new, nor does it address the fact that we live under white dominance. And if you're fine with that, then please carry on. And so my podcast, I take a lot of time and I deal with let's examine the civil rights movement critically, because I think we're making some of the same mistakes now. If you look at black home ownership in 1968, when the Housing Act was passed, black home ownership today, there's virtually no change. If you look at black unemployment, 1968, black unemployment now, virtually no change. If you look at black and white wealth, we can keep going down the line. People lie, but numbers don't. And so, what are all these gains that I'm supposed to be so excited about? What are all these fabulous things that our organizations are doing? If the numbers don't look any different, then please justify it. But again, if the goal is to just look busy, because you can be busy and not effective. If we want to look busy, if we want to do things where black professionals and black middle class people talk to each other, then by all means. But in reality, all these organizations, we're not actually addressing the core. And in fact, if we're honest with ourselves, we've actually given up. And I think that's why there's such a fervent fight over DEI, because we've given up on the idea of challenging white dominance. We've given up on the idea that black people can actually live and have self-determination. We've given up the idea of having control of anything. And so we are going to fight tooth and nail for maybe a crumb that a few middle-class black people can have access. And if that's the world that you want to leave your children in, by all means. It's just not the world that I want.